Ben, one of our producers and our roving reporter there doing some good work. Ben, thank you. We're ready to start our discussion. And, you know, we have a number of clips of the interesting behavior displayed on the political platform. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Emma.
Now, Mr. Tang, maybe I can start with you. We have had 4 elections, and I know we're looking at the St. Joseph by-election, but if you look at what we've learned, what are we really doing, what are we saying, how would you describe this election season?
Well, elections have generally been described as silly season, and this is a real manifestation of that. It validates the statement that it is absolutely silly season. It's unfortunate that over the 4 elections, we've seen absolutely negative campaigning. And the negative campaigning, I think, has a real impact on the population. But I think the population is maturing, and our behavior is beginning to show that. I mean, I lost a bet on the Shogunas by-election.
Yes, we did speak after that.
it was just drinks, but I lost the bet because I was sure that the UNC would win that election. But Jack Warner won that election. And I had to just stop and analyze that, and what I saw was really an aberration. That people wanted to send a message to the People's Partnership and to the UNC saying that we're not happy. And because Jack Warner had been there for so long and had been really working that constituency, they rewarded him. But that was the end of it. I think that the ILP is dead. I think the ILP was a creation of very much the media and very much the investment. I live in Diego Martin, and I was amazed one day when ILP came through Diego Martin, and the talk was, Diego Martin gone green. You know, and that bubbled up to the national media. And you look at all of the ILP's campaigning, and that's what you saw. But you look at the results, and what you saw is people being true to that David Rudder statement that, you know, you go to all the panyards, but you know who you're jumping with on Juve morning.
That is very, very true. And you know, a pan man actually, with Darrell is speaking his language. Darrell, you are a psychologist. We're looking at the psyche, and I know that you've been writing a lot about this, because obviously, this is obviously stirring something.
Yes, actually the writing is very cathartic for me, because it helps me to get things off my chest that I can't, you know, just
Is it the silliest of seasons?
Worst. Silliest of seasons, all right? But let me just say something. It's important that people understand that what we're saying here is our opinion.
Yes.
All right? Far too often I see people in the media saying things and stating it as though it's fact, when it's really just opinion and speculation. And we have to be a little bit careful about that sometimes, because people are impressionable and they could go away with the wrong message.
Oh yeah, I know. I get blasted on the political blogs every day. So every day.
All right. I think, you know, in looking, you know, my thing is always trying to connect the dots and see things, you know, use insight to see things that maybe the average person would not see or wouldn't come about so, you know, clearly, so easily. And what I can say very clearly from looking at the elections that have been held this year is that the population, there's a shift I'm seeing in terms of what the population expects from their representatives. You're hearing more and more people talking about delivery and talking about what's there for me and what has happened to me. It's gotten very, very personal. Now, there is still a strong, and there always will be, as far as I'm concerned, a strong, what we call a tribal base.
I want to ask about that.
Yeah.
Mr. I want to bring you into the conversation. This term, tribal politics, a return to tribal politics. Yesterday, Terence Dayal Singh actually gave us the first interview. And he said, shame on you, Ganga Singh, for bringing race and my Indianness and my ethnicity into the conversation. Is it all just political peacock? Are we too sensitive? Or is it that the politicians are just insensitive to what the reality is?
The politicians historically recognize that racial politics and appealing to tribal instincts has worked. But that happened in 56 and 62 and all of that. And we understand that, because if you look at how our country has been populated, you understand the racial pockets and so on. To me, the overlay that the People's Partnership brought it is what they described as the underdevelopment of the rural communities, and saying that those communities were ignored. And that I don't have I don't have the evidence, but there's some, I used to work with schools a lot.
Right, yes.
And one of the things that I noticed is if you went to Barrackpore, there was a secondary school. Forest Reserve, there was a secondary school. Penal, there was a secondary school. Point Fortin, Siparia, and so on. Now, that to me said that there was a broad-based approach to the delivery of education. So when you say now that the rural communities have been underdeveloped, and you start to do things like put a hospital in a place where it ought not to be, without a philosophy, without a thought, then what you're doing is you're going back to your tribal instincts so that you can say to your community, I brought you a hospital, I brought you a university, therefore, which is not what we're looking at.
Now, it's interesting that Ian had this ad about the 25 projects in 10 days, and I know I want to ask about that. My director's telling me we're going to take a very short break. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. So we had Ben doing a piece about people talking about what can be done for them. It's about delivery. But then if you spin that, Ian's campaign was built on delivery. In fact, he said it, if I could do this in 10 days, imagine what I could have done if I'm your MP. That I have done what people cannot do, and if I had 5 more days, I will topple a party that's 50 years old.
Yeah. You know, it's a hell of a thing when you can look at something that's been said and objectively, without any sort of bias or any sort of attachment, and evaluate it for what it is. Because a lot of things that have been said, I just simply don't understand what it even means. Like that statement, for example, regarding the getting the project. It's such a loaded statement. What exactly was the candidate trying to say there, you know? And it brings back to my point that I was making earlier on, that there's a whole bunch of voters who are looking on, who are trying to make sense out of the situation, and who right now might be very inclined to either sit on the fence or take a position against somebody as opposed to for somebody.
But are we the minority, that independent thinking voter? Am I a minority? I look at policy, I look at what you can really do, what can you bring to the parliament. When I think of parliament, I think of the pinnacle of the democracy of our country that we fought for, that policies are debated, the direction of the education system of which I'm part of is determined. But when you look at stuff, and then also I want to ask Ms. Deming, as a communications consultant, the ads that we saw, we're talking about badly behaved politicians. Dear Jack, thank you for the split the vote. Dear Keith, you're welcome.
That was extremely unfortunate, and I'm going to blame the media.
Okay, I'll take responsibility.
I'm going to blame the media. The reason I'm doing that is that there's something called an attribution clause. Those ads were allowed without an attribution clause. That's something I teach students, that when you're doing an ad, you must have an attribution clause. You must be able to look at the ad and know exactly who put that ad there. The media allowed it. I'm told that at the moment, there's some kind of litigation that's going on there.
Yeah.
I'm also told that the Broadcast Council
is looking at it.
That they're looking at it. But you can't look at it post facto. From the first time it was coming in, somebody should have looked at it and asked, is this something? And if you didn't know, should they have said, okay, what is our policy with this? You can't only go for the money. And we need to, the media, I think, media managers, media owners, need to be careful about what they allow, because very often what they allow becomes part of that ritual that we have and part of our folklore. Those ads were bad.
Now, that whole concept of split the vote, your divine right to vote, and this is about asking questions.
Yes.
What did you understand by a statement, don't split the vote, return to your home?
What I understand is that some parties attempted to go after their tribal voters and almost ignored the other voters who like to sit down and think through things and resolve issues and work things out. Because that kind of a campaign, that kind of a position, it can only appeal to your emotion. Who can say who I'm supposed to vote for?
But I don't know if we're a minority. Mr. Mills, are we a minority? I mean, I look at it and I think, you don't have a divine right to my vote. My vote goes to who I can relate to. And I always say it's who I can relate to.
And you are a minority, so live with that. Because the tribal voter and the attitude that informs anybody to think that they can take ownership of your vote has a very, very deep root. Permit me a little story. We moved to Shogunas in the 80s, and the first election, I went to vote. I lived in Hoover South, so Bazio Pandey was my representative. First election that I went to vote, 3 little Indian ladies with urnis on, and one comes to me and says, "Where I Bas sign this time?" I said, "What?" What she meant was, what is Bas's sign this time?
Right.
And I told her, I described it to her. But her instincts, her history, her belief was, I don't care what Bas sign is, but just tell me the sign. That's what I'm voting for. And that is exactly what this Don't Split the Vote was an attempt at. I was embarrassed when I heard my Prime Minister say, if you split the vote, water gone. Schools gone, this gone, that gone. Come on. You are making an assumption that the population is ignorant and that the population will simply follow you because you've appealed to an instinct. And that is unfortunate.
These instincts, Darrell, what is it that makes tribal politics so attractive? Why do we feel, and even Terence D. Alsing, and I know that I asked him some questions, and I think I ended up on his wrong side during that interview. When I asked him, if I listen to what you say, when he said they're attacking his Indianness, and shame on you for doing that. For me, joining the PNM, you question my religion, my ethnicity, my history, my dynasty. So I asked him, would it have been easier for him to join the UNC? And he said, by asking me that question, you are continuing the conversation of race. Yes. But why is it that this conversation continues? Why is there this perception that once you're Indian, you go for the UNC? Once you're not Indian, you will go for the PNM? And what about the mixed people? Where do you fall? Where was Deming fall?
Right, the mixed people, you know, present a very, very interesting.
Welcome back to Trinidad and Tobago. Well, we do have some thoughts and some clips from the political platform that we will play for you in a little bit. But looking at the positions espoused over the last 4 elections, Ms. Deming, we made the joke about, I've probably not seen as many elections as you have. But do you think it's getting any better? And I talk about the fact that when I look at a politician, I look at someone that speaks to me, that I can relate to. I also compare it to first world countries, as in, will I see Barack Obama or Angela Merkel making statements like this? Will she allow platform speakers to say the things that are being said on the platform? I actually follow campaigns. There was an election in Detroit for mayor. I follow that campaign to see what is being said and what is allowed to be. But are we being bad to the Prime Minister? Is it a strategy that they're using? Is it that she is keeping her speeches very clear, and yet her foot soldiers are doing the attacks? Can we hold her accountable for what's being said on the platform?
We have to hold the Prime Minister accountable. That's what leadership is about. But you're seeing that the Prime Minister is being handled, because after the local government election, when you looked at her persona and her messages out of this by-election, the St. Joseph by-election, it was very different. So what you saw in the UNC representation, or the People's Partnership representation after the St. Joseph by-election, was a very sober, very different kind of response. So I think that they're learning. But the bigger question about whether the population is learning, whether the political parties are learning, I think that there are some baby steps that are being made, which are excellent, because to me, the PNM did not really go into the gutter politics. They attempted a very high kind of ethic, philosophy and moral and so on, which sometimes I thought was boring and repetitive. But on the other side, it was, what am I going to hear tonight?
But is it, are we being unfair? Is it because the media spends so much attention, or put so much attention on this cannibalization that was taking place between the ILP and the UNC, that the PNM, because they didn't receive as much media coverage as the rest, and their meetings were not broadcast live. I think we just saw 1 or 2 radio stations. And so they kept a little below the radar, as opposed to the things that were being said on the other platforms, which were thrown out in the public, and I would be like, what? I can't believe they said that.
But in doing a political campaign, you have to operate at 2 levels. In anything, you operate at 2 levels. You operate above the line. The above the line has the mass media strategy, and what are those public messages? And then you operate below the line. And I like to describe below the line in politics as a hand-to-hand combat. And that's where elections are won. How effective is your hand-to-hand combat? Who are you winning? And to me, that happened in this election. But what we saw is that the ILP and the UNC took the media space, and they dominated the media space.
by dominating the media space? What was the major impact, Daryl, in terms of the psyche of the nation, of the population? Did we reinforce negative behavior? Did we reinforce positive behavior? Did we encourage change?
Remember something, all political parties aim to get into power, okay? And any political entity will do whatever it thinks it needs to do in order to achieve that particular objective. That being said, I would really like somebody who is interested enough and has the resources to do some serious research into what people in our population, both Trinidad and Tobago, how they are viewing the way the last set of elections were conducted. I can remember as far back as 1981. I was 2 or something. Anyway, I can remember as far back as the 81 election, and I've never ever seen the amount of mudslinging and the amount of negativity as I've seen in this last campaign. My suspicion is that that type of approach has appealed to the emotive side of the tribal voters. I keep using that word all the time. But at the same time, I feel it has turned off a lot of other people who may have sat down on the fence this time. I don't know if they will sit down on the fence in
2050.
when the next election is. When the next election is, all right?
Who is the real winner and the real loser here?
The loser, I think the loser is the UNC. I think the winner is Trinidad and Tobago, because we are seeing now that we can do it a little differently. What we've seen that to me is a big learning in this is a higher voter turnout, for instance, in the local government election. We've seen 2 by-elections. In my entire life, I have not seen by-elections in the way that we've seen it this time. So you're seeing, Trinidad is beginning to see that, you know, it can be different. We can have a by-election. No matter how it's triggered, we can have by-elections. They can be viable. And that to me is a good test. It's a good kind of practice for the general elections. And we have, when will the general elections be? I am going to take some bets again. I think they're going down to the wire. I think we're likely to have it all the way down in August 2015.
You're on a streak with those bets, so be careful.
I know. Daryl, your closing comments as we wrap this interview.
Okay, I just want to say that the powers that be, those who are in charge of the electorate, while I understand that they want to get into power and they will do whatever it takes, understand that there's a significant part of the population that's looking on, and I believe is getting turned off by what we are seeing. And I think that section of the electorate, because remember, it's not just the tribal votes, it's the swing votes that get you in power.
Yeah, but
that section of the population, our concerns need to be addressed also.
But if this approach was so wrong, then why was the race so close? If you are telling me now that, and I looked at it because, you know, like I had this discussion off air, and I was surprised at how close the race was because they ran completely different campaigns.
I was looking at EBC's website to see some statistics on voter turnouts. Now, they only have, the only section I saw was for general elections, but what I could tell you, the highest voter turnouts we've had in the history of our general elections have been 1961, which was the year before independence, all right? 1986, when we had a 33-3, and 2010. So when people feel that there's a crisis, they come out. And when I say come out, I mean 1961, we had an 88% voter turnout. The closest we've had to that, I mean, 2010 was, I think, 69.8 or something like that. But generally, it's in the 50s to lower 60s. Those other years in between 50s to 60s, all right? So there's a whole chunk of people and a whole chunk of younger people now who have different concerns and who see things and see the world differently. There's a whole chunk of people who are likely to stain their finger, as they say, whenever the next election is. Right?
10 seconds, Mr. Temi, your closing comments.
There's a tremendous opportunity for the parties to bring forward fresh, young faces in order to connect with that 20% that the CSO has described as the largest growing sector in our country. So to me, that's where the money is.
Looking at where the money is, what the message is, and the type of behavior that we're seeing on the public platform, badly behaved public officials. We'll take a very short break. When we come back, we'll have more for you. Stay with us.